The wind had changed since the funeral. Even weeks later, the scent of lavender, the one Mary used to hang in the windowsill, still lingered in the corners of the house like a memory refusing to fade. And for Samuel Carter, silence had become more than just the absence of sound. It was a weight, a wall, a way of surviving. He had buried his wife with his own hands under the cottonwood tree behind their cabin on the edge of Black Hollow. Since then, he hadn't spoken more than a few words to anyone, even as neighbors came with casseroles and folded condolences. The ranch no longer felt like home. It felt like something left behind. The horses sensed it too, less spirited, more unsettled. And the children he once welcomed from town for riding lessons stopped coming. Samuel didn't mind. He didn't want anyone to see the way he was unraveling, quietly, behind his own walls. That was before the stagecoach brought her. A dust-covered wagon pulled into town late one afternoon, groaning under the weight of crates and time. Among its passengers was a woman wearing a simple gray dress, a bonnet tilted low, and eyes that didn't dart like others, but held steady, like she'd already seen the worst and decided to keep going anyway. Her name was Eliza Rowan. She stepped down with a satchel, no husband in sight, no family to greet her, just a letter clutched in her hand and a determined calm on her face. Word traveled fast in a town like Granger's Post, and by sunset, folks had whispered every theory, from mail-order bride abandoned to runaway schoolteacher. But Eliza didn't explain. She simply rented the small cabin at the edge of the prairie, the one just 2 hills over from Samuel's land, and began working at the livery, mending harnesses and cleaning stalls like she'd always belonged. Samuel noticed her first by accident. She walked the ridge every morning before sunrise, a basket of feed under her arm, hair pinned but loose from the wind. She didn't look toward his land, never waved, but somehow her silence didn't feel like his. It felt different. He told himself it didn't matter, that he wasn't ready, that love was buried 6 feet under, and no woman, no matter how steady her gaze, could ever dig it back out. But Samuel didn't know that fate, quiet and stubborn, had already begun its slow work. And Eliza Rowan wasn't here to fall in love. She was here to heal, whether she knew it or not. The storm rolled in before dawn, brushing the prairie with wind and a warning. Rain didn't fall hard in Granger's Post often, but when it did, it swept in like it remembered every dry season before it. Samuel woke to the sound of cracking wood. He rushed outside barefoot, shirt half-buttoned, and saw the damage before he got close. The north fence had collapsed, 3 panels torn down by the wind, and 2 of his cattle had wandered toward the ridge. That ridge, the one that separated his land from hers. Eliza was already out there. She wore no coat, just a shawl pulled tight over her shoulders, her skirt soaked at the hem. She had a rope in one hand and calm in her eyes, as if nothing about a runaway cow at sunrise could surprise her. Samuel slowed his steps when he saw her gently coaxing the animal back with a bucket of oats, her voice soft and low. Not many people could soothe a beast without saying much. It was a language of presence, not words. He recognized it. "That one's a wanderer," he said after a long silence. Eliza didn't startle. She turned to look at him with the same even gaze. "Most things that break loose usually are," she said. It wasn't a flirtation, it wasn't small talk, it was simply truth. Samuel nodded once and took the rope from her hand. Their fingers brushed, just briefly, but in that second something cracked deeper than the fence. They worked side by side to mend it. No one spoke of dead wives or broken beginnings. They just worked, passing nails, lifting beams, tying knots. Samuel, who hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks, found himself saying things he didn't mean to out loud. She used to like storms. Eliza didn't ask who she was. She just looked up at the sky. Some storms clean more than they ruin. When the fence was standing again, he offered to walk her back to her cabin. She declined gently. "You've already done enough," she said, but with no edge to it, only quiet thanks. As he watched her disappear down the slope, shawl clutched around her and boots sinking into mud, Samuel felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest. Not love, not yet, but the memory of what hope used to feel like. The days that followed returned to silence, but it was no longer the kind that swallowed. It had changed, somehow, like the quiet between pages when you're reading something you don't yet understand but don't want to stop. Samuel stayed on his land, tending to the cattle with his usual precision, but now when he glanced toward the ridge, he did it more often. Not out of suspicion, not even curiosity, just wondering. Eliza, on her part, went about her work at the livery with the same quiet steadiness that had already begun to reshape how people saw her. She didn't talk much, but when she did, it was with meaning. Not gossip, not filler. Just the kind of honesty that made folks lean in and listen. One evening, as dusk rolled over the hills and lamplight flickered against cabin windows, Samuel stepped onto his porch to find something unexpected. A letter, folded carefully, tucked beneath a small stone on the wooden rail. No name. Just 2 words written in a delicate, even hand. Thank you. He turned the note over and over in his fingers, unsure what to make of it. There was no signature, but there didn't need to be. The calm in the script matched the calm in her voice. That night the wind picked up. Rain wasn't far behind. He couldn't sleep. It wasn't the memory of Mary that haunted him now. It was the absence of something new, something quiet and unnamed. A presence that had no title in his life but felt real nonetheless. Then, just as thunder rumbled from the east, there came a knock. Not on the front door, on the side, where no one ever knocked. Samuel opened it slowly and found Eliza standing there, cloak-soaked, hair stuck to her temple, holding a satchel in one hand and something pressed against her chest with the other. "I didn't mean to come this far," she said quickly, eyes cast down. "I was walking, and the rain started, and I didn't want to go back through the ridge in the dark." Samuel stepped aside without a word, letting her in. She didn't offer an apology. He didn't ask for one. She sat near the fire while he lit the second lamp. There, in that warm pocket of silence, she finally spoke. "The letter wasn't just for the fence." Samuel didn't interrupt. "It was for not looking at me like I'm a story you've already decided on." Her voice cracked, but she caught herself. Then, carefully, she reached into her satchel and pulled out a small book, its spine torn, pages warped from age and weather. "This is all I brought with me. It's not worth much, but it's mine, and I don't give it to many people to see." Samuel took the book with a quiet nod and placed it on the shelf by the hearth without opening it. He didn't need to read it. He'd already started learning her story, with his silence, with his patience, with the space he gave her to exist without question. The storm rolled through like a warning, beating the rooftop and rattling the shutters until dawn. Eliza slept curled up near the fire, her soaked boots drying beneath the hearth. Samuel hadn't gone back to bed. He sat across the room, half-shadowed, half-lit, the kind of still that didn't need rest. When morning came, she stirred, eyes blinking open as if unsure where she was. Then she saw the book resting neatly on the shelf, and him standing by the window with 2 mugs of coffee. One for her. No words, just warmth. She left before midday, and they didn't talk about it. 2 weeks passed before they crossed paths again. This time, not in the woods, not in the rain, but on Main Street. Samuel had ridden into town for supplies. Eliza was leaving the mercantile with a burlap sack of dry goods when a group of men at the saloon door made a noise, a whistle maybe, something sharp. Her shoulders stiffened. Samuel saw it happen from across the street, and before he could think about it, he was off his horse and walking toward her. "You need help with that?" he asked gently, taking the sack from her arms. She didn't speak, but she let him. As they walked together toward his wagon, she finally said, just loud enough for him to hear, "Sometimes the way a man looks at you, it writes your story before you've spoken a word." Samuel said nothing. He just loaded the sack into the wagon and waited for her to climb in before he did. As they rode back toward her side of the valley, she asked quietly, "Do you believe some silences are louder than words?" He nodded. "Most of mine are." That made her smile. But it was the kind of smile that looked like it hurt. As they passed the old willow tree near the fork in the road, Eliza's voice came again, lower this time. "My father used to say I was born in silence. Never cried. Not even as a baby. I think he thought that meant I was meant for a quiet life. But silence, it was just what I learned to live inside." Samuel looked at her then, really looked, and saw something he hadn't seen before. Not just pain, permission, a quiet asking, "Do you see me now?" And in the space between his heart and hers, something shifted. It wasn't the kind of thing Samuel noticed normally. Fabric, colors. But when he saw it sitting on the arm of his rocking chair, he knew immediately it was hers. A soft, faded scarf, still holding the faintest scent of lavender and wood smoke. She must have forgotten it that night during the storm. He turned it over once, twice, before gently folding it and placing it on the mantel. It sat there for days, untouched, waiting. Eliza hadn't meant to leave it behind. She didn't even realize it was missing until she reached up one cold morning and found nothing wrapped around her neck. Her instinct was to let it go. But a strange tug, part guilt, part something softer, drew her back toward the ridge. She didn't plan the visit. just followed the feeling. Samuel was splitting wood out back when he heard her horse's hooves. He came around the corner, wiping his hands on a cloth, and froze when he saw her. She looked nervous. She started, her voice tentative. I think I left something here. He didn't answer, just turned and walked inside. When he returned, the scarf was folded neatly in his hand. She reached out for it, but he hesitated. You didn't just leave a scarf, Eliza, he said, his voice low. Her eyes widened. For a second, neither of them moved. Then she took the scarf and didn't say a word. Later that evening, she found herself sitting on his porch, still wearing the scarf, still not sure why she hadn't left. He poured 2 mugs of coffee again. She accepted without protest this time. You always keep things people forget? She asked. Only the ones I hoped they come back for. The silence after that was thick with meaning. She sipped her coffee, then looked at him with a half smile. You surprise me. How so? You don't speak much, but when you do, I hear it for a long time. They didn't touch. They didn't confess anything. But that night when she left, he watched her ride away with something new in his chest. Hope! Eliza hadn't seen that face in years. But as the sun dipped behind the hills and she crossed into town for supplies, there he was, leaning against the rail of the general store, boot heel dragging in the dirt like he owned the place. Clayton Ward. Tall, slick, and as venomous as the day she left. He straightened when he saw her, flashing the same grin he used to wear when things turned dangerous. Well, the ghost returns. Her hands tightened on the reins. The old instinct to bolt stirred in her feet, but she stood firm. Just here for coffee and flour, Clayton. And maybe something else, if the rumors are true. Heard you've been keeping company up on Hawthorne Ridge. Her heart thudded. Samuel's name wasn't spoken, but it hung there, heavy and silent. You leave him out of this, she said sharply. Oh, I intend to. You, though, I'm here for what you owe. That night she didn't sleep. She packed the supplies and rode hard through the ridge's winding trail, arriving at Samuel's cabin just past midnight. Her knock was desperate, rapid. He opened the door with a lantern in hand, eyes squinting against the dark. Eliza? He's back, Clayton. Samuel stepped aside. She entered without waiting. In the flickering firelight, she told him everything. About Clayton, about what she'd fled, about the paper she signed years ago when she was young, foolish, and trying to save her mother's land, signing herself over as a debt she never thought would be collected. Samuel listened, quiet as always, but his knuckles turned white around the mug in his hands. When she finished, he leaned forward. He touches you, he dies. It wasn't said with anger, just cold truth. The next morning, Eliza offered to leave. She didn't want to bring danger to his door. Samuel refused. You didn't ask me to fight for you, but I will. Why? Because you make this place feel like home again. As she stood on the porch watching the wind stir the leaves, Samuel walked up behind her and gently placed the scarf around her neck again. No promises, no grand confessions, just protection. Quiet, steady, and full of a love that didn't need words. The morning after Eliza's return, the air on the ridge turned still. Too still. The wind held its breath, and even the birds seemed to keep their distance. Samuel noticed it first. Years of ranching and war had sharpened his instincts. He's coming. Eliza looked up from the porch steps, where she'd been mending a loose thread on her blouse. How do you know? When trouble's on its way, nature goes quiet. By noon, the evidence was there. A dust trail curled on the horizon. Not fast, like a messenger. Slow. Intentional. A man riding not in haste, but with purpose. Samuel saddled his horse, checking his rifle and the revolver at his hip. He didn't look at Eliza as he spoke. Go inside, lock the door. No. He turned to her, calm but firm. This ain't your fight. I'm done running. I won't hide while you bleed for me. Their eyes met in a silence deeper than any argument. Then gently, Samuel nodded. All right, but stay behind me. Clayton arrived in this clearing an hour later, dressed in black, reins held loosely. Behind him were 2 other men, one thin and twitchy, the other thick-necked and silent. Samuel Hawthorne, Clayton called, remaining on horseback. You've got something that belongs to me. She's not yours, Samuel answered. Never was. Clayton chuckled and slid off his horse, slow and theatrical. Debt doesn't care about romance, friend. And I don't care about your debts. He stepped forward, rifle lowered but ready. Eliza stood behind the door, peeking through the slats. Her heart pounded like a hammer, but she stayed still, just as they agreed. Clayton smirked, motioning for his men to move wide. So this is how it ends? Guns and bravado? Thought you were better than that. Samuel took a step forward. No, but I'm not letting you hurt her. The standoff was brief. The twitchy man reached it first. Too early. A shot rang out from Samuel's rifle, and he dropped like a sack of feed. The second man backed away, hands raised. Wasn't paid enough for this, he muttered, disappearing into the trees. Clayton didn't flinch. You just made a powerful enemy. Samuel reloaded calmly. No, I just buried one. That night, the ridge was quiet again. No more riders, no more shadows. Samuel sat on the porch, gun resting against the wall, while Eliza brought him a mug of coffee. So, what now? She asked. He looked at her, eyes softer than she'd ever seen. Now we start again. The days that followed brought a peace Eliza had never known. It wasn't the loud kind, not fireworks or declarations. It was the quiet kind, the kind that settled over the land at dawn, in the sound of coffee poured into tin cups, in the rustle of laundry drying on a line, in the way Samuel would pause his work just to watch her braid her hair by the window. And for Eliza, it was unfamiliar. She wasn't used to kindness without expectation, to a house that held space for her without judgment. Her life before had been survival, transactional, conditional, fragile. But this was something else. One morning, as the first light crept over the horizon, she found Samuel mending a saddle on the porch. He looked up when she stepped outside, wrapped in a shawl. Couldn't sleep? He asked. Didn't want to, she replied softly. Not while this feels real. He set the saddle aside and gestured to the spot beside him. She sat. It is real, Eliza. She hesitated. Then why does it still scare me? Samuel took a long breath. Because people like us, we're used to waiting for the good to break. Eliza nodded, her fingers fidgeting with the fringe of her shawl. You lost someone, she said. Samuel didn't respond at first. Then, my wife, years ago, fever took her, and the child we were expecting. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. I'm sorry. I stopped believing in love after that, he continued. Didn't think my heart had space for anything but duty. Until you. Later that day, Samuel surprised her. He'd carved her a wooden comb. Not perfect, a little crooked at one end, but smooth and warm to the touch. Figured you deserved something that's yours, he said. Eliza stared at it like it was made of gold. Why? Because you stayed. No one had ever made her feel wanted before. She touched the comb to her chest and whispered, No one's ever carved anything for me. Then it's about time someone did. That evening, after dinner, Eliza asked if she could learn to ride properly. Samuel raised a brow. Properly? You handled yourself just fine that day I met you. That was desperation. I want confidence. He smiled, rare but real. Sun's still up. Let's saddle her. They spent the next hour in the field. Eliza learning, Samuel patient. He never once raised his voice or made her feel small for her mistakes. Instead, he caught her when she slipped, laughed when she cursed, and clapped when she finally dismounted without stumbling. And in that laughter, she felt the first crack in the wall she'd built around her heart. That night, sitting beside the fireplace, Eliza whispered, Thank you for making me feel safe. Samuel didn't answer with words. He reached out, not demanding, not assuming, just offering. And when she leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder, she knew something sacred had begun to take root. The wind shifted that morning, not in the skies, though clouds had thickened above the pasture, but in the quiet tension that rolled in with the arrival of the post rider. Eliza wasn't expecting anything. She never did. No one wrote to her. No one remembered she existed. But when the rider handed Samuel a folded envelope with her name scratched across the front, Eliza ran, her breath caught like a snare in her chest. You okay? Samuel asked gently, seeing the color drain from her face. I don't know, she replied, eyes glued to the paper. She took the envelope with trembling hands and stepped into the house. Inside, the fire crackled low in the hearth, and the wooden floor creaked beneath her as she sat down. She opened the envelope slowly, the sound of tearing paper louder than it should have been. The letter was short. It was from her sister Martha, the only blood she had left. Eliza, they said you were dead, or gone, but someone saw you up north, with a man, a widower. I don't care what they say. I need you to come. Ma's gone. Pa's worse. I can't hold the house by myself. You always knew how to fix what was broken. Please, come home. Martha. For the first time in months, Eliza's hands clenched with the memory of old bruises, physical and otherwise. The house Martha spoke of was no home. It had been a cage, and now it was falling apart without the daughter they used to shame, silence, and sell. Samuel found her staring at the fire, the letter limp in her lap. Bad news? Family, she said. One word, heavy enough to silence the room. Do you need to go? He asked, careful. I don't know. She's my sister. Samuel nodded, understanding more than she said. You want me to ride with you? I don't want to go, Eliza whispered. But I don't want to be someone who turns her back when others cry for help. He crouched beside her chair, his eyes steady and calm. Then let's go. Not because you owe them anything, but because it's who you are now. They left the next morning, Samuel closed the ranch behind him like a man who trusted the land to wait. Eliza, wrapped in a coat that still smelled like pine wood and ash, rode beside him in silence. When they arrived 2 days later, the house was as she remembered, only smaller, sadder. Martha opened the door, thin and pale, with a child on her hip and another tugging at her skirt. "You came," Martha breathed. Eliza stepped forward, but didn't fall back into old roles. She didn't apologize. She didn't bow her head. Instead, she reached for her sister's hand and said, "I came because I choose to." Samuel helped repair the porch and chop wood, while Eliza soothed crying children and helped clean out the mildew of a house once drowned in grief. But each night, they slept in the barn together, not the house. Samuel made her a bed of straw and blankets and kept a lantern burning low. "I don't belong there anymore," Eliza said on the third night. "No," Samuel agreed. "You've outgrown it." On the fifth day, Martha confessed, "I'm not strong like you." Eliza took her sister's hand. "You don't have to be. Just don't disappear." "Are you staying?" "No, I have a home now." "With him?" Eliza smiled softly. "Yes, but more importantly, with myself." As they rode away from the house that once buried her light, Eliza turned to Samuel. "Thank you for coming with me." "You don't owe me thanks." "No," she said, "but I'm learning that love isn't something owed, it's something chosen." They returned to the ranch as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the golden fields. The land looked the same, but Eliza felt different, stronger, freer. Samuel noticed too. "You sit straighter in the saddle," he said with a smirk. "Maybe I'm tired of being small," Eliza replied. The laughter between them was easy now, like home, like wind through open windows. But peace has a strange way of making us forget that the past doesn't always stay buried. The knock came on the second morning back. It wasn't loud but firm, a deliberate rhythm that spoke of someone who didn't beg. Samuel opened the door. There stood a tall man, dust-covered, with a wide-brimmed hat low over his eyes and a worn duster brushing the porch. "You're hard to find," the stranger said. "Depends who's looking," Samuel replied calmly. "I'm not here for trouble," the man added. "Just a debt owed." Eliza stepped behind Samuel instinctively, watching the man with narrowed eyes. Something in his presence unsettled her, not fear, but history. The stranger noticed her and gave a respectful nod. "Ma'am, who are you?" she asked. "Name's Caleb Quinn. Used to ride with your husband." Samuel stiffened. "That was a long time ago." "Not for everyone," Caleb said, stepping inside as Samuel moved slightly to the side. He removed his hat and looked around the room like it hurt. "You really settled down, huh?" he murmured. "What do you want, Caleb? You remember the Lassiter job?" Silence. "You know I do." "Well, someone finally found out what happened, and they think you ran off with the gold." Eliza looked between them, confused. "What is he talking about?" "Something I buried a long time ago," Samuel said, jaw tight. That night, after Caleb left to sleep in the barn, Eliza and Samuel sat beside the fire. The air was heavy. "You rode with outlaws?" she asked softly. "For a time. After Abigail died, I didn't care who I became. I rode into trouble thinking maybe I'd die there." "And the gold?" "There was gold, but I didn't take it. I walked away before the heist ended." "Why is this man here now?" "Because someone wants revenge, or money. And if they think I have it," he trailed off. "They'll come looking," Eliza finished for him. Eliza stood up slowly. "We have to be ready." "You don't have to stay." "Yes, I do, because this is my home too now, and whatever storm comes, we face it together." That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. He stood by the window, watching the moonlight stretch across the field. A shadow moved near the barn, then another. He reached for his rifle and whispered over his shoulder, "Eliza, wake up!" She sat up instantly. "They're here." The ranch, once cloaked in silence and moonlight, now bristled with tension. Samuel handed Eliza a lantern and a small pistol, something she'd learned to handle over the weeks, even if she still hated the weight of it in her hands. "Stay inside unless you have no choice," Samuel murmured. "We both know I never just stay inside," she said quietly. He gave a thin smile, proud and worried all at once. From the shadows near the barn, 5 riders emerged. Men rough and weathered, armed with the look of desperation and revenge. At their head rode a man with a red bandana around his throat and a scar that ran down the left side of his face. "Samuel Cole," he bellowed, "you owe a debt!" Samuel stepped out from the porch, his rifle held low but ready. "I owe nothing to thieves." "That gold belonged to all of us." "Then why are you the only one left trying to claim it?" Samuel asked. A silence hung in the air like fog. The others shifted in their saddles, uncertain. Eliza stood just inside the door, holding her breath. She knew this moment, the brink before a storm. She had lived her whole life on the edge of others' choices. Not tonight. Suddenly Caleb Quinn emerged from the barn. gun drawn but lowered. "Put the weapons down," he told the riders. "He didn't take your gold. I did." Gasps rang out even from Samuel. "What?" he growled. "I buried it. You walked away, Sam, but I didn't." "You brought this on us?" Eliza asked, stepping out beside Samuel now, her voice shaking with rage. Caleb lowered his gaze. "I never thought they'd come looking, but I'm not letting them take it out on you." The leader sneered. "Then we'll take it from you." What happened next was chaos. Gunfire cracked through the night like thunder. Samuel pulled Eliza to cover as Caleb fired back. The barn door swung open and one of the horses bolted, scattering two of the attackers. A bullet shattered the porch rail beside Eliza. Her ears rang. Samuel took aim and fired. One of the riders dropped. In the end, it was over fast. 3 attackers fled into the hills. 1 lay injured. The leader, face twisted with disbelief, was disarmed by Caleb, who simply said, "You'll live, but you'll carry this night with you." Back inside the house, Eliza sank into a chair, shaking. Samuel stood beside her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" She looked up. "I'm tired of running. Tired of being powerless." "You're not powerless, Eliza. You stood beside me tonight. That means more than you know." Later, Caleb saddled his horse. "I'll ride east," he said. "Find the gold, bury it deeper, maybe finally burn the map." Samuel nodded. The old weight between them finally lifted. "Thank you for coming clean." "She's a good woman," Caleb said, nodding toward the house. "Don't lose her." Samuel didn't respond. He didn't have to. The morning after the gunfight, the town was silent. The kind of silence that only follows violence, when even the birds seem to know to keep their songs to themselves. Eliza stood on the porch, brushing her hands over the banister Samuel had begun repairing just weeks ago. Bullet holes still marked the wood, but the sun was rising clean and gold, as if to remind them that life would continue. She held a mug of coffee, steam curling upward into the cool morning air, when she noticed the envelope tucked beneath the doorframe. It wasn't sealed with wax, just folded, dust-stained, and official-looking. She hesitated before picking it up. Inside the house, Samuel read the letter in silence. His jaw tightened. His eyes didn't move much, not because he didn't understand, but because every word hit like a stone. "Is it bad?" Eliza finally asked. Samuel looked up. "They're taking the land, unless I pay back taxes. All of it." "How much?" He hesitated. "Too much." The paper trembled slightly in his hand. It wasn't just about the land. It was about everything they'd built, the peace they'd tried to hold on to, about starting again and having the world slap your hands away. They spent the next few days searching for solutions. Samuel rode into town, hat in hand, pride set aside. But the bank said what banks always said. "Sorry, Mr. Cole, there's not much we can do." Eliza tried to sell a few of her hand-sewn quilts, but it barely scratched the surface. Even the local saloon keeper offered help, though in whispered tones behind the bar, as if charity could break reputations. Nothing was enough. But Eliza refused to accept defeat. One afternoon, she found Samuel standing behind the barn, staring at the creek. "I've seen that look before," she said, crossing her arms. "What look?" "The one you wear when you think walking away is easier than staying." He turned slowly, and something in his eyes broke open. Finally, he let her in. "I lost everything once, Eliza. I can't lose this too." "Then stop trying to hold it all yourself." She stepped forward and put her hands on his chest. "Let me carry some of it. Let's fight this together." That night, Samuel sat at the kitchen table with pen and ink, and for the first time in years he wrote a letter. Not to the bank, not to the county, but to a friend he'd left behind when grief took everything from him. A man named Barrett who owed him nothing, but who never forgot the loyalty Samuel once gave. A week later, a telegram arrived. It was short, barely 6 words. "You'll have what you need, Barrett." Samuel folded the telegram and placed it in Eliza's hand. "You did this," he said quietly. "No, we did." The debt was paid. The land was theirs. For the first time in months, Samuel slept without waking in the middle of the night, heart pounding. Eliza, too, found peace in the stillness of the ranch, falling asleep to the creaking of wind through the shutters and the warmth of Samuel's arm wrapped gently around her waist. But peace, they were learning, never stayed long on the frontier. It was a late afternoon when the riders arrived. 3 of them, dusty horses, worn saddlebags, wide-brimmed hats pulled low. The kind of men who watched more than they spoke. And when they finally dismounted, their boots hit the earth like they belonged to it. Samuel stepped off the porch before they could say a word. "Can I help you, gents?" The tallest of the 3 tipped his hat. His face was scarred down the right side, like fire or a blade had once marked him. "Looking for Samuel Cole. You found him." The man glanced at Eliza, who had stepped onto the porch behind Samuel. "This ain't about trouble," he said carefully. "It's about the girl." Samuel narrowed his eyes. "What girl?" "Her name's Clara." Eliza froze. "Clara?" she echoed. My sister?" The scarred man nodded. "We rode with her, before she was taken." They sat at the kitchen table an hour later. The men were quiet as they spoke, only sharing what they deemed necessary. Clara had disappeared 2 years ago. Taken from a small settlement by men who trafficked in despair, selling humans like cattle. Somehow she'd escaped, but she never returned to her family. She said she didn't want to be found, the scarred man added. But then she started writing letters. About a woman named Eliza, about someone named Cole. Samuel's knuckles turned white on the edge of the table. Where is she now? Don't know. Last we heard she was headed to Dodge, maybe trying to start over. Eliza looked down at her hands, trembling slightly. I thought she was dead. That night, she and Samuel stood under the stars in silence. You want to go after her? He finally said. I need to. Then I'm going with you. Eliza turned to him, her voice soft but unshaken. You've given me everything, Samuel. But this is something I have to do on my own, at least to start. He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. I don't want to lose you. You won't. But I can't look in the mirror if I don't try to find her. The next morning, with the sun rising pale behind her, Eliza saddled a horse and kissed Samuel goodbye. The ranch behind her, the unknown ahead. In her satchel, she carried nothing but a map, a letter, and a promise. A promise whispered by blood. I'm coming, Claire, no matter what I find. Dodge was no longer the sleepy frontier town Eliza remembered from tales. It pulsed now with a feverish energy, half dream, half nightmare. Saloons spilled music and misery onto the streets. Laughter and gunshots rang out with the same frequency. She arrived with little more than dust on her cloak and determination in her bones. Clara had been here. Of that, Eliza was certain. She started at the post office. The clerk, a red-faced man with tobacco-stained fingers, rifled through a drawer before handing her a crumpled envelope. Left this 3 weeks ago. Said someone would come asking. Eliza opened it slowly. Inside was a single sentence written in Clara's looping hand. Not all chains are visible. If you love me, come to where I was once sold. Her stomach turned. The auction house. The one that had marked the darkest page of her own past. It had been burned to the ground months ago after a vigilante mob torched it in protest. But the ruins still stood. Blackened beams and scorched soil. A place where screams had once soaked into the earth. Eliza rode out before dusk. The air grew colder near the ruins, as if the past refused to die peacefully. Her horse snorted uneasily, hooves crunching over charred wood and ashes. She found her there, Clara, sitting on a broken beam, hair longer, eyes older, a faded shawl wrapped around her shoulders like a fragile shield. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Eliza dismounted and ran forward, collapsing to her knees. Clara! You shouldn't have come. I had to. Clara looked at her with eyes full of stories she hadn't told. I came here to burn it down again, not with fire, but with truth. They spent the night at a nearby boarding house. Clara told her everything. About the man who bought her and kept her hidden. About the other girls who never escaped. About the night she slipped away, carrying secrets no one wanted unearthed. I was afraid if I came back I'd destroy what little you had. Eliza reached for her hand. What I have now, what I built with Samuel. It only matters if I can share it with you. For the first time in years, Clara cried. Back at the ranch, Samuel waited. He kept Eliza's chair by the fire. He made extra coffee every morning. And every day, he read a chapter from the book she had left behind, out loud, as if she were still there to hear it. Until one evening, as he turned a page, he heard the front gate creak open. He stepped onto the porch, and there they were, Eliza. And beside her, Clara, worn down but not broken. This is where she belongs, Eliza whispered. Samuel nodded. Then she stays. The following days moved slowly, like molasses over a cold tin plate. Clara had settled into the spare room, the one once intended for storage but now neatly furnished, Samuel's quiet handiwork. She woke up before sunrise, helped Eliza knead dough, and fed the chickens without complaint. Her voice was still soft, her presence careful, like someone afraid to claim too much space. Samuel observed her quietly. She was not a child anymore, nor a girl lost in chains, but a woman layered in silence. One afternoon, as they sat beneath the cottonwood tree, Clara finally asked, Why did he do it, Eliza? Why did he give up everything for us? Eliza smiled gently. Because Samuel never lost anyone and didn't care. He lost everything and still chose to care. Clara's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where clouds rolled in thick like ghosts. I don't know if I can love again. Samuel, who had approached without them noticing, spoke for the first time that day. Then don't force it. Just live, and let it come if it's meant to. It was the most words Clara had ever heard him say. She blinked at him as though seeing him new. Trouble came a week later. A man rode in at dusk, tall, arrogant, with a scar down his cheek like a strike of lightning. He dismounted and walked straight to the porch, ignoring Samuel's steady stare. "I'm looking for Clara. She left something behind." Clara stepped out, face pale. "I left nothing, and I'm not going back." The man laughed. "You think a name change and a patch of dirt makes you free?" Samuel stood up. "She said no." The man smirked. "Who are you supposed to be, her protector?" Samuel didn't answer. He didn't need to. The shotgun leaning by the door answered for him. That night, Clara trembled in her bed. Eliza sat with her, brushing her hair like when they were girls. "He won't hurt you," Eliza whispered. "But he might hurt you or Samuel." "We faced worse, and we're still standing." Clara nodded, though her eyes remained locked on the dark window. The past had found them, but so had love, and this time love didn't intend to let go. The next morning broke with a hush that felt too still, too silent. Samuel was already up, checking the fence line with his rifle slung across his back. His boots left heavy tracks in the dew-covered earth, but his thoughts ran deeper than the soil. He wasn't just protecting a homestead anymore. He was protecting a future, one that included Clara. Eliza and Clara were in the kitchen when the first sound of hooves broke the quiet. The man with the scar had returned, and he wasn't alone. 3 other riders flanked him, all wearing the same smugness Samuel had seen too many times in lawless towns. He stepped out onto the porch, calm, steady. Clara stood behind the window curtain, her hands trembling but her heart louder than her fear. The man dismounted again, voice oily. "You sure about this, widower? You really want to make enemies over a girl that ain't yours?" Samuel didn't blink. "You don't know what she is to me." The rider took a step forward. His boots crushed a blossom underfoot. "She was bought once. I can buy her again." Clara opened the door and stepped out. "Try," she said, her voice firmer than the wind. "But this time I'm not chained. I have people. I have a home." The man scoffed. Samuel raised the rifle and leveled it at the man's chest. "This land has rules, and on this land no one owns anyone." A tense silence. Then one of the other riders chuckled nervously. "Come on, Jasper. She ain't worth it. Not with a rifle aimed at your heart and 2 women with frying pans inside." Laughter broke the tension, but not for Jasper. He spat on the ground, eyes burning. "You'll regret this." Samuel's voice was a slow drawl. "Not as much as you'll regret staying." And with that, the men turned their horses, kicking up dust as they rode away. Later that night, Clara sat on the porch, staring at the stars. Samuel sat beside her, a mug of coffee cooling between his palms. "You didn't have to risk everything," she whispered. He turned to her, voice quiet. "But I did, and I would again." She looked at him, tears glimmering but not falling. "Why?" He met her eyes. "Because I lost everything once, and now I've found something worth protecting again." And for the first time she leaned her head on his shoulder, not as someone rescued, but as someone choosing to stay. The days after the confrontation passed quietly, but they left an echo behind, like the thunder that still rumbled in the mountains long after the storm had rolled on. Clara hadn't said much. She kept her hands busy, helping Eliza bake bread, tending to the garden, brushing the horses with the tenderness only a girl who had known hardship could offer. But she hadn't yet unpacked her small satchel. It sat at the foot of the bed Samuel had given her. Neatly folded clothes, a single book, a silver button from her mother's apron. The weight of a past she hadn't figured out how to release. That evening, Samuel knocked lightly on her doorframe, holding a wooden box. "Figured this might belong here," he said. She looked at him puzzled, until he opened it. Inside were brushes, paints, pencils, all salvaged from Eliza's attic where Samuel had stashed them years ago. "You said you liked to draw. Didn't want you to feel like you couldn't be more than what they made you." Clara stared at the contents, the edges of her fingers trembling slightly as she lifted a brush. It was like touching a memory she thought was long buried. "I haven't held one of these in years." "You don't have to be who they told you to be," Samuel said softly. "You can be who you were always meant to be." She took the box and set it on her table. That night, after they all went to bed, she lit a lamp and sat in silence. Then, with a single deep breath, she began to draw. Not chains, not dark rooms, but light. The first strokes were tentative. Samuel's boots by the porch, Eliza's hands kneading dough, the outline of a dog by the barn, and then finally her own face, smiling. The next morning, Clara stepped into the kitchen, her cheeks streaked with flour and hair tied back in a red ribbon Eliza had given her. She looked different, not because of clothes or posture, but because of peace. "I want to stay," she said, voice strong. "Not because I have nowhere else, but because I've found something worth staying for." Samuel, who'd been mending a saddle by the window, didn't look up. "Then I'll make sure this place always feels like home." And it already did. The sun had barely risen over the ridge when Eliza spotted the rider. Dust curled behind him as he approached with purpose, not the meandering gait of a traveler or the easy rhythm of a neighbor stopping by. No, this was a man delivering something, and it carried weight. He handed the letter to Samuel wordlessly and tipped his hat. "From Silver Rock," the courier said, "signed and sealed." Samuel stood on the porch, turning the envelope over in his hands. The seal bore the crest of the Wyoming County Court. Eliza, watching from the doorway, frowned. "You know what it's about?" Samuel didn't answer. Inside, Clara poured coffee and tried not to tremble when she saw his face pale. "Is it bad news?" He gave her a reassuring glance, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'll find out." He opened it slowly, carefully. As he read, the room seemed to hold its breath. The letter wasn't about taxes, or land ownership, or cattle. It was about her. Clara Estelle Ward, age 17, was still legally under the guardianship of her uncle, Martin Ward, the man who had sold her at the auction, and he was contesting her current placement, citing unlawful transfer of custody. "He's trying to claim her," Samuel muttered. "To take her back?" Clara's face drained of color. "No, he can't. I'm safe here. You bought me fair and legal. There were witnesses." Eliza stepped forward, her voice steel. "He sold you. That makes him no family of yours." But the law didn't always care about right and wrong. Sometimes it only saw ink and signatures. Samuel walked out to the pasture, fists clenched, heart pounding. He had seen too much pain already. From the war, from losing his wife, from watching life break people slowly and cruelly. He couldn't let it happen again. He wouldn't. "She's staying," he whispered to the wind. "Even if I have to fight the whole territory to keep her safe." That night, Clara sat in her room, staring at the half-finished drawing she'd begun the day before. A sketch of the ranch house surrounded by gentle hills and tall fences. Safe. Still. Her fingers hovered over the paper, then moved, this time drawing a man standing tall in the center, holding her hand. Samuel rode hard toward Silver Rock the next morning, leaving Eliza and Clara behind with firm instructions and a rifle leaning near the door. He hated leaving them, especially now, but he needed to speak directly with Judge Merriman. Letters were too slow and time was not on their side. The road twisted through low valleys and over sun-baked ridges. Clouds gathered in the distance, teasing rain, but the air stayed dry and sharp. Samuel kept his eyes ahead, jaw tight, reins gripped like a lifeline. When he reached Silver Rock, it was near midday. The streets bustled with wagons and chatter, but Samuel didn't stop. He tied his horse outside the courthouse and stepped into the cool, musty air of justice. The clerk looked up. "Business with the judge?" Samuel nodded. "Samuel Thorne. Urgent matter. Involves a custody challenge filed by a Martin Ward." The name made the clerk blink, and he disappeared into the back without another word. Moments later, Judge Merriman appeared, an aging man with sharp eyes and little patience for foolishness. "Mr. Thorne," he said, motioning him in, "let's talk about this girl of yours." Samuel laid out the story. Clara, the auction, Martin Ward's sudden interest after months of absence. Judge Merriman listened in silence, then leaned back, folding his hands. "I've seen Martin Ward's petition. Claims the auction was illegal. Claims Clara was sold without consent, that you've taken her as a laborer under false pretenses." Samuel bristled. "She's not a servant, she's family. That man sold her like livestock." "That may be," the judge interrupted, "but Martin has hired a lawyer. He's arrived in town already." Samuel's heart sank. On his way out, Samuel stopped at the telegraph office. He wired a message to an old friend in Cheyenne, someone who owed him more than one favor. If this came to a courtroom, he wouldn't face it alone. Back at the ranch, Clara stood outside painting the fence while Eliza watched the horizon. The sky had turned strange, too quiet, ominous. "Do you think he'll come back soon?" Clara asked. "He will," Eliza said. "But I'm not worried about Samuel not returning. I'm worried about who might show up before him." That night, just past twilight, a lone figure on horseback appeared at the edge of the property. He didn't ride up to the house. He stopped at the tree line, watching. Eliza saw him first. Clara stepped out with her. "Is it him?" she whispered. Eliza narrowed her eyes. "I don't know, but I don't like the way he waits." The figure turned and disappeared into the trees, like a shadow folding into night. Morning on the Thorne Ranch came with a haze hanging low over the hills, as if the land itself held its breath. Clara was up early, feeding the chickens. She tried to focus on the gentle clucking and the rhythm of the morning, but the shadow from last night still clung to her thoughts. She hadn't told Eliza, but she had recognized the figure by the tree line. Inside, Eliza stirred the fire while watching the window. Her instincts, honed by years of hardship, told her trouble wasn't just coming, it was already here. She didn't have to wait long. Just before noon, the sound of hooves crunched through the gravel drive. Clara froze on the porch as a tall man dismounted, dusting his sleeves with lazy precision. His coat was clean, boots polished, too clean for ranch work, and his eyes, cold as river stones. "Clara," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You've grown up." Clara's voice caught in her throat. "Hello, Martin." Eliza stepped out, shotgun balanced against her hip. "You've got no business here." Martin raised both hands in mock surrender. "I'm just visiting family." "You sold your family," Eliza said coldly. "She stopped being yours the day you gave her away." Martin's jaw tightened. The courts might disagree. Inside the house, Clara's hands shook as she poured water. She heard every word through the window. For months she had built a life from scraps of safety, but one man, one memory, and it all began to unravel. Martin didn't stay long, just long enough to make his point. "Let your man know I've come, and next time I won't be so polite." As he rode off, Eliza watched until he was a speck on the horizon. Then she turned to Clara, her voice firm. "No more running, Clara. We hold our ground now." That evening Samuel returned, dust-covered, tired, but determined. Clara met him at the fence line, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was here." Samuel's face went stone still. "What did he say?" "He said he'd be back." Samuel nodded once, slow and steady. "Then I'll be waiting." That night no one slept much. Eliza sat near the window with a loaded rifle. Samuel stood outside under the stars, hat low, arms crossed, eyes on the distance. And Clara? Clara wrote something in her old journal. Not just thoughts, but truths. Her story. So that when the day came to speak it, she'd be ready. At sunrise, Samuel found a letter waiting for him in the town post office. It had been forwarded from Cheyenne, an old contact of his, a woman named Marla Thorne, who had once worked in social records. He tore the envelope open beneath the awning of the general store, heart pounding. Inside were 2 pages. One was a copy of the original bill of transfer for Clara and her siblings, unsigned by a judge. The second was a sworn affidavit from a witness stating that Clara's parents had received payment for the children under duress, pressured by a man named Martin Graves. Samuel's jaw clenched. This was the break they needed. Back at the ranch, Clara was feeding the lambs when he returned. She saw the fire in his eyes before he even spoke. "We're going to end this, Clara, for good." He laid out the plan. They'd file a petition with the county judge, backed by the affidavit. It wouldn't undo the past, but it would give them leverage. If Martin tried to challenge custody, he'd be facing fraud charges. "You'd be legally free," Samuel said quietly, "in every way." Clara blinked, tears building. She nodded, slowly, but with certainty. "Then let's do it." But Martin had already made his next move. That afternoon, 3 men arrived at the ranch gate. One wore a sheriff's badge. The others were private attorneys. "We're here on behalf of Mr. Martin Graves," said the taller lawyer. "He's filed a claim of paternal guardianship and petitioned for an emergency removal." Eliza stepped forward, arms crossed, voice like granite. "You have a warrant?" "We don't need one. Not with probable cause and a filed motion." Samuel handed them the affidavit from Marla Thorne without a word. The lawyer scanned it. Then again, slower. His mouth thinned. "This complicates things." "No," Samuel said. "It ends things." The sheriff hesitated, then handed the affidavit back. "Until this is reviewed in court, no removal will take place. But I'll be watching." As they left, Clara stood silently behind the front door, fingers white against the frame. Eliza walked over and placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "He's not taking you, girl. Not while we still breathe." That night, the ranch felt quieter, but not in fear. It was the quiet of a storm being prepared for. Inside, Samuel sat at the table, pen in hand, writing to Marla again. "We're close," he murmured. "We just need one more piece of proof." "And Clara?" Clara no longer hid. She sat on the porch with Eliza, her eyes on the dark. "He tried to buy me," she whispered. "But you can't buy family." Eliza smiled, soft and proud. "That's right, child, you build it." The next few days brought tension that hung in the air like the weight before a downpour. Samuel, Clara, and Eliza worked the ranch with a steady rhythm, keeping their hands busy, even as their minds raced. The court hearing was only 5 days away, but it was Clara, quietly sweeping the attic, who stumbled across something that froze her blood. A faded journal, not hers, but her mother's, hidden under an old floorboard, wrapped in oilcloth and bound with twine. She sat down right there on the floor, her heart pounding. She opened to the first page. April 3rd. Graves came again. Said if we didn't sign the papers, he'd ruin us. I don't know what to do. The children are scared, and I'm terrified he'll take Clara by force. She's the one he wants most. Clara's fingers trembled. She flipped through more entries, each darker than the last, each one describing the pressure, the threats, and finally, the exchange. Her parents had been poor, desperate, and terrified. He said he'd find a way to make it look legal. Said he had friends in the court. I didn't know what else to do. Tears spilled silently down her cheeks. But on the very last page, her mother had written, "If Clara ever finds this, please forgive me, baby. I didn't protect you, but maybe this will." Clara clutched the journal to her chest. This was it. This was the proof. Downstairs, she showed it to Samuel and Eliza. They read it in silence. Samuel let out a long breath and looked at her. "This changes everything." "Only if I testify," Clara said, voice low. "You don't have to," Eliza began, but Clara shook her head. "Yes, I do." For the first time, Clara stood not as someone rescued, but someone ready to fight. 2 days later in the courthouse, Clara stood on the witness stand, hands folded tightly. Martin sat across from her, smug, flanked by his attorneys. But Clara's voice didn't tremble. She read directly from the journal, then lifted her sleeve to show the scar still etched on her forearm, remnants of the night he had tried to drag her away when she was 12. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. The judge leaned forward. "Is this your handwriting, Mr. Graves?" I don't—" "Do not lie," the judge warned. "You're under oath." Martin's jaw locked. He said nothing. After an intense silence, the judge ruled, "The petition for guardianship is denied. Further, the court will open a criminal investigation into fraudulent custody claims and threats made by Mr. Graves." Gasps rippled through the room. Clara's legs gave out only slightly, but Samuel was there. He caught her before she could fall. "You did it," he whispered. She looked up at him, eyes brimming. "We did it." The courtroom victory echoed like a quiet song in Clara's chest, sweet, but muffled by exhaustion. Back at the ranch, everything looked the same. The fences still needed mending, the barn roof still leaked, and the chickens still clucked in their unbothered rhythm. But she had changed. Gone was the girl who flinched at footsteps behind her. Gone was the silence that had once chained her voice. And yet, in the calm, she found a new kind of storm. Healing. That evening, Clara sat on the porch steps with Eliza, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The moon was soft overhead, and the lantern light inside the house flickered gently like a heartbeat. "You haven't said much," Eliza offered gently. "I don't know what to say," Clara replied, eyes locked on the stars. "I won, but I don't feel victorious, just emptied." Eliza nodded slowly. "Sometimes surviving is louder than winning." They sat in silence for a while longer before Clara whispered, "I used to imagine what it would be like to be chosen. Not for a bargain, not for convenience, but just for me." Inside the barn, Samuel leaned against the stall, listening to the quiet creak of the rafters. He heard Clara's words through the open window and felt something shift inside him. He remembered the first time he saw her, head bowed at the auction, eyes dull with resignation. Now she stood tall, fierce, free, and he was terrified, because he loved her. But he didn't want her to feel owned. Later that night, Clara stepped quietly into the barn. The air smelled of hay and leather and dust. Samuel turned at the sound of her boots. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Couldn't stop thinking," she replied. Then after a beat, "About you." Samuel's brow creased slightly. "Me? You gave me space. You never asked for anything, not even thanks." "You don't owe me anything." "I know," she said, "but I want to give you something anyway." He looked at her, unsure. "A dance." "Now?" "Now." She took his hand, placed it on her waist, and slowly they moved. No music, no rhythm, just steps in the dark, like learning to breathe again. Clara leaned her head against his chest. "Do you still believe love doesn't come twice?" Samuel whispered, almost too softly to hear. "I stopped believing that the day you smiled at me for real." The morning sun glinted off the dewy grass like 1,000 tiny stars. Clara had never seen the ranch look more alive. Birds sang from the trees. Horses paced calmly in their paddocks. And in her chest was a quiet peace she never thought she'd feel. Samuel poured coffee in the kitchen, watching Clara laugh with Eliza over something neither man nor memory could ever take from them. But just as he reached to refill his cup, the rhythmic clop of hooves on gravel echoed in the distance. Then came the voice, low, familiar. "Samuel McGraw, I'll be darned." Samuel froze, his spine stiffening. The mug slipped slightly in his grip. Clara peeked out the door, puzzled. A tall figure on horseback dismounted with practiced ease, worn boots, a travel-stained coat, and a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Is that really you?" Samuel walked outside slowly, nodding once. "Hello, Wade." Wade Holloway was a name from a lifetime ago. They'd ridden together as boys, fought together in the war that left scars inside them both. Wade had taken the outlaw path Samuel refused. Rumors swirled around him, guns for hire, deals with dangerous men. And now he stood at Samuel's gate, eyes sharp with curiosity. Heard about the girl, the auction? You always did have a soft heart. Samuel didn't flinch. She's not a story, Wade. Wade chuckled. Didn't say she was. But if the tales are true, you saved her. Took in her whole lot, huh? They saved me too. Wade's eyes flickered toward the house. Clara stood at the window, watching them. Wade tipped his hat with a small smile. She's prettier than the gossip claims. She's not a prize either. Relax, friend, I came to warn you. Samuel narrowed his eyes. Warn me? Wade stepped closer, his voice dropping. Some men back in Rust Hollow think you stepped out of line. That no man should be undoing the kind of commerce you just dismantled. You humiliated someone powerful when you made that girl yours. Samuel's jaw clenched. She's not mine. She chose to stay. Wade shrugged. I'm just the messenger. But I figured you deserved a heads up before they come to make an example of you. Inside, Clara could feel the tension thickening like smoke. She saw Samuel's stance, rigid, protective, and knew something dark had arrived at their doorstep. When he came back inside, she waited quietly, letting him sit first. That man, she said, he's not just a friend. He was, Samuel admitted. Now he's the shadow of who I might have become. Is he dangerous? Samuel nodded. No, but the men behind him might be. Clara's eyes didn't falter. Then let's stand together. You'd fight this with me? I didn't survive one kind of captivity to fall into fear again. By the next dawn, the ranch no longer felt like just a home. It felt like a fortress, waiting to be tested. Samuel stood with his rifle slung across his back, not out of fear, but preparedness. The weight of Wade's warning hadn't dulled overnight. If anything, it had sharpened into something colder. Resolve. Clara, meanwhile, moved through the house with a quiet intensity. She tucked notes into drawers for the children. She gathered supplies, blankets, and quietly reminded Eliza and the others that if she told them to hide, they must listen. But in her heart, she wasn't preparing for war. She was preparing for clarity. She needed Samuel to know that no threat, old or new, could tear her from the life they were building. Just before noon, a rider appeared. Not Wade, not a neighbor, but a man dressed in black with dust on his boots and a letter in his hand. Samuel met him at the gate, rifle visible but not raised. Message for Samuel McGraw, the man said. Samuel took it silently. The rider turned and left without another word. The envelope smelled faintly of tobacco and pine. Samuel opened it, read it once, then handed it to Clara. You took what wasn't yours. She was meant for someone else. You'll answer for it. Sundown. Rust Hollow. Clara's hands didn't shake. It's a trap. Probably, Samuel said. Are you going? Only if you're okay with me leaving. She met his eyes. I'd go with you if you let me. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the distant ridge, Samuel saddled his horse. Clara stood beside him, arms crossed, heart steady. She wore her old boots again, the ones she hadn't touched since the auction. You can't stop me from coming, she said. I wasn't going to try. He offered her a second horse. They rode together, silent, side by side, toward Rust Hollow. The town was half empty when they arrived, yet the streets whispered of tension. Old men leaned in doorways. Women watched from behind curtains. And under the creaking sign of the saloon stood Wade and 5 other men, all bearing the look of hired consequence. You came, Wade said. Didn't want to disappoint you. One of the men stepped forward. She don't belong with you, rancher. You ruined a deal. The kind that keeps this part of the world turning. Clara, unflinching, stepped between them. I wasn't yours to trade. You were bought. I was rescued. Samuel's voice cut through the dusk. She made her choice. You don't own her future. Maybe not, another man growled, but we can still decide yours. What happened next didn't make the newspapers. But folks in Rust Hollow would speak of it for years. The woman who stood tall beside a widowed rancher, facing down the kind of men who thought fear still ruled hearts. No shots fired, no blood drawn, just a quiet stand. And when Wade raised his hand, the others froze. Let them go, Wade said. You sure? One grumbled. Wade nodded toward Clara. She's not afraid. That makes her dangerous. That night, under the stars, Samuel and Clara rode home. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Love had a language of its own, spoken in how she leaned into his side, in how he reached for her hand. They'd stood against the past, together, and won. The morning after Rust Hollow was painted in light softer than usual, as if the sky itself was exhaling. Clara stirred early, wrapped in a blanket on the front porch, watching the prairie mist lift from the earth like ghosts, finally ready to move on. Inside, Samuel was already awake. He'd barely slept. Not because of fear, but because of clarity. For so long, he'd been surviving, just breathing, feeding the horses, fixing fences, existing. But since Clara came, he was living again. She looked up as he joined her, a mug of coffee in each hand. He sat beside her without a word, handed her the cup, and waited. "You're quiet," she said. "Still learning to believe it's real." She gave a soft smile, her fingers warming on the mug. "So am I." There was a long pause before Samuel spoke again, voice low and careful. "I wasn't sure I could ever feel something like this again. I thought maybe love only happens once." "So did I." They looked at each other, no fear left in their eyes, only the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, they deserved this. Later that day, Clara helped Eliza and the others in the garden. The older children had stopped asking if they were going to move again. They spoke of next harvests, of building a chicken coop, of painting the barn. They were rooting. Samuel stood at a distance, tools in hand, watching. The way Clara wiped dirt from a child's cheek, the way her laugh danced like wind through wheat. It was magic without show, healing without medicine. He didn't just want her here. He needed her here, not to mend him, but because with her, he was finally whole. That evening, the family sat around the long dining table, the oil lamp casting gold light over biscuits and stew. For the first time, no one rushed. No one counted bites. They were simply present. Clara glanced across the table and met Samuel's eyes. He nodded once. A silent promise, a vow without altar. Later, as the children settled into bed, Clara found him outside, leaning against the fence beneath a sky full of stars. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "A ring," he said softly. "A porch swing, a future." She smiled. "In that order?" "Any order you want." And then he added, voice full of something deep and certain. "I know I never said it, not properly. But I love you, Clara. I don't know how long I've loved you. Maybe since that first day at the auction. Maybe even before." Clara's breath caught. "You don't have to say it back," he added. But she stepped closer, her hand finding his chest, over the heart that had learned to beat again. "I love you too, Samuel," fiercely, quietly, truly. They stood there beneath the stars, no longer haunted by silence, but embraced by it. It came on the back of a dusty rider just after sunrise, a sealed envelope, rough-edged, ink-smudged, and addressed in a handwriting Clara hadn't seen in years. Her hand trembled as she took it. "Everything all right?" Samuel asked, watching from the barn steps. I don't know." She didn't open it right away. Instead, she walked slowly to the creek that cut through the edge of the property, the only place that ever truly silenced her mind. There, surrounded by cottonwoods and the whisper of wind, she tore the seal. Inside was only a single page, but it carried the weight of a storm. The letter was from her brother, the one she thought lost to the same auction block that nearly took her future. He was alive. He had found her, and he needed help. A railroad company had begun swallowing land near their hometown. Families were being driven out. Those too poor to fight back were being crushed, just like their family had once been. "I don't know who else to ask, Clara," the letter ended. "They listen to men out there, men with land. If you're with someone like that, someone with a voice, they might listen. Come if you can. We're running out of time." That night, Samuel read the letter by lamplight. He didn't ask her what she planned to do. He already knew. "You want to go?" he said quietly. Clara nodded. "He's the only family I have left, besides the one we built here." Samuel stared into the fire. His hands were calloused from years of labor, but they trembled slightly now. "You think you might not come back?" Clara didn't answer, because neither of them knew the answer. The next morning, the house was quiet. The children could sense something had shifted. Clara packed light, just enough for travel. But in her apron pocket, she kept a folded drawing from little Eliza, a crude picture of the whole family holding hands under a tree. She kissed them all goodbye. Samuel laughed. "This isn't the end," he said, holding her tightly. "No," she said. "It's the beginning of something I have to finish." He handed her a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "It's not much," he said. "Just something to remind you where your home is." She opened it later, on the trail. A wooden ring carved smooth with her name etched inside. Clara rode alone toward a past she thought buried. But now, with love behind her, and strength she never knew she carried, she was ready to rewrite what had once been written in pain. And Samuel? He waited, because when a man loves quietly but deeply, he waits, even if it takes forever. Clara hadn't returned in weeks. Each sunset painted the sky above Samuel's ranch in colors too beautiful for the weight he carried. He fed the animals, tucked the children into bed, and answered their hopeful questions with smiles thinner by the day. But every night his eyes turned toward the ridge, waiting for the silhouette of her horse. Then one morning it came. She wasn't alone. Behind her rode a half-dozen others, men and women, dusty, weathered, proud, and in the middle of them, riding beside Clara, was a man with her eyes. Her brother. Samuel ran to meet them before their horses had even stopped. She dismounted first and crossed to him quickly. No words at first. Just a long, silent embrace that spoke of battles fought and won. "It's over?" he asked. She nodded. "The company pulled out. Enough voices, enough landowners stood up. We made them listen." Her brother stepped forward then, removing his hat. "I've heard a lot about you," he said, voice firm but kind. "Thank you for giving my sister a home when the world wouldn't." Samuel shook his hand. "She's the one who built it." That evening they celebrated. The table was full of food, of stories, of laughter. Children ran underfoot. Music drifted from a harmonica someone unearthed. Clara sat beside Samuel on the porch swing, her head against his shoulder. "I never believed a hug could save a person," she whispered. "Neither did I," he murmured, "until yours saved me." They sat in peace as the moon climbed high, casting silver light over the land they had fought for. The house, the fields, the children inside. It was all theirs. Not just by deed or name, but by love. The townspeople would speak of Samuel's ranch differently now, not just as a place of horses and wheat, but of redemption, of second chances, of a silent widower who opened his arms to the lost and found his own heart healed in the process. Clara never needed to be rescued. She only needed someone strong enough to believe she was worth holding on to. And Samuel? He never let go again.